Hey everyone, welcome back to Blender to Reality Part 3. It's a great day to be creative, and we're going to be finishing up our custom light switch covers. I'll be talking about the painting process, some of the paints I use, and then some of the insights I picked up along the way with this project, which surprisingly there was a lot. But I do think that's part of the artist journey, and the process is to be trying to learn lessons from everything you're doing and each project that you take on. Be sure to like and subscribe and hit that bell. That way you don't miss out on any future Blender tutorials or 3D art tutorials or any of my artist check-ins. We're going to keep this intro short this week, so let's go ahead and get right into it. Woo! Alright, let's get this light switch cover finished up. And I can't tell you how satisfying it is as an artist to be able to take something that you create digitally and then be able to hold it as a physical object from your 3D printer. So I highly recommend, if you haven't tried it before, definitely try making your 3D creations into physical products. So to start my finishing process with my prints, I typically sand off all the support mark and I try to smooth out all the layer lines. I use a 180, 220, and a 600 grit sandpaper. I will say sanding becomes very painstaking and tedious and your hands will cramp up, but shout out to my brother because for my birthday a couple weeks ago he gave me a reciprocating sander or a pen sander, and I'll be doing a video on that. So I'm so excited and so thankful for that pen sander because it's gonna help my hands so much and hopefully be able to prevent the hand cramps, or at least maybe I'll be getting a different hand cramp now. When sanding, I try to really get into every little nook and cranny, try to get all the details sanded, and be able to make sure that the model's smooth and it'll look great when it gets to primer. I do a mixture of sanding and then wet sanding and then wiping off the model with a wet paper towel, that way dust doesn't get everywhere. So when I got to the painting process, I started by thinking maybe I could just brush on my airbrush colors and do it that way. Well, it turned out that airbrush paints are pretty thin, and it was just really runny on the model. I was having to do multiple coats. I did 2 or 3 coats on it, and it still was very transparent. Probably would have ended up needing to do like 5 or 6 coats for it to be a solid color. But this is part of the artist process, and when you take on a project is to problem solve, experiment, and the only way you're going to learn how things work or if something will work is by trying, because you're never going to know until you find out. And the only way you're going to get better is by actually trying to do it. So even though this may seem like I was wasting time, I did learn something from it, and I know how to move forward with my future projects. So like I said, after the third coat, I realized that this probably wasn't going to work out and it was going to take way longer than it needed to. So when realizing this, I just sanded off all the paint again and got it ready to be primed. And once I had it primed, I took a trip over to Hobby Lobby to pick up some acrylic paints, silicone brushes. I was just thinking that the acrylic paint would be a little thicker and probably apply a little easier. And I wouldn't be sitting there putting on 5, 6 coats. I could only just have to do 1 or 2. So I just picked up a cheap set of little tubes of paint. There's plenty of colors. I knew that it was going to work out and I could mix to get to the colors that I'd wanted. And immediately from the first brush stroke, I knew immediately that this was the right move and that going with the acrylic paints and the thicker paint was the right option. To be fair, I could have taped off each line and airbrushed it to get a really smooth coat of paint on there. But I figured for a light switch cover, taping off each individual line would have been very tedious and almost unnecessary. And then by the end of painting this with the acrylic paints, I came to really love the brush texture on the light switch cover. And again, this is something that I would have never known or realized if I wouldn't experiment and problem solve after I realized that the airbrush paints were going to be too thin for painting. And there's something really satisfying about the painting process, almost as satisfying as watching the printing process. Again, it just goes back to being able to see your creations really come to life in the real world. Oh my gosh, I will say that these nooks and crannies and the crevices of the lines of this pattern became very difficult to paint and get sharp edges on, so I had to go over it a few different times, back and forth between colors. But I came up with something that I was pretty happy with in the end. And I think this would be a good time to talk about some of the insights I picked up along with this project. I immediately realized that when you initially think something's going to be easy, turns out you're probably going to end up with a lot of problems with that project. I thought episode 1 of Blender to Reality would be pretty simple with this light switch cover, but I ended up with 4 failed prints, almost wasting a whole bottle of resin, which, if you don't know, resin's pretty expensive. But my takeaway from all these failed prints was that I need to double check measurements, I need to double check the slicing, I really need to make sure supports are there, that way there's no warping of my model. I also learned a lot about tolerances when it comes to 3D models, which you might hear other 3D artists talk about tolerances. I never really understood what those were until I'm now experiencing it. But a tolerance is when you're creating your booleans or cutouts in your model that you can measure the exact measurement that you need. For example, the inside cut hole for the rocker switch. I made that exact to a normal light switch cover. And what I needed to do to prevent having to sand extra is I needed to enlarge that cutout just slightly. That way there was a little wiggle room within that center cutout. Now with these light switch covers all painted up, let's get it over to clear coat and get it on the wall. Sheesh! Well, congratulations, you got custom light switch covers now. And if you're still watching and made it this far to the end of the video, I just want to say thank you so much. And I really hope that you learned something with this project. I hope Blender to Reality can be a series that shows you that we can take our skills of 3D art and art in general and apply it to our real world and bring more art into the world. That way everyone can see more creativity, which I think the world needs. And if you followed along and you now have some light switch covers too, please comment and share them on social media and tag me. I'd love to see what you created and how yours ended up looking. Or let me know in the comments what struggles you occurred during this process or what issues came up. Maybe we all can help each other figure out what's going on. Don't forget to like and subscribe down below and hit that bell. That way you don't miss out on episode 2 of Blender to Reality or any upcoming videos. So until next time, stay safe and stay creative out there. Peace.